How do we effectively identify state after the open? Say at like 11 p.m., all right, or later after the Fab 4 is not relevant. Okay, thank you, sir. So that's a good question. So I'm going to repeat the question again. The question is, Oliver, you talk frequently about a trader always wanting to know what the state of their underlying item is, what the state of their stock is, what the state of their Forex contract is, Forex pair is, what the state of their futures contract is. Whatever you're trading, you should be able to identify what the state is. Now, most traders don't even know what state is about. Say, Oliver, what do you mean state? Well, there are two dominant states. A stock can either be in a very narrow, tight state, narrow, flattish, and tight. The best trades happen from narrow, tight states. Then you can have super wide states, a wide state. All right. This usually happens after an extended move up or down in your stock. All right. So a flat state, a flat, narrow state is more like this. And then you can explode into a wide state. All right. So the question is, I know how to determine for a stock when there's a narrow or wide state at the open, but what about later? And the key to this is two moving averages. The two moving averages I've always told you is the most relevant. The 20-period simple moving average and the 200-period moving average. So look at me carefully. I'm going to show you a chart in just a second, but we've got to get conceptually the concept down, right? So think of this. You got a shorter term moving average, the 20, and a longer term moving average. Moving average pairs work best when you pair them with a relatively short term one and a long term one, okay? So the 20 shorter term, the 200 longer term. Now, when those two moving averages are relatively flat and close together, all right? Now, it can be tilty a little bit, but just not like this, all right? So relatively flat and close together, you're dealing with a narrow state, no matter when that happens. At the open, later in the day, later in the afternoon, it doesn't matter. Relatively flat and close together, narrow state. The other thing is, if they are far apart, like this, they're far apart, or doesn't matter, like this, far apart, or like this, far apart. They can even be flat. Well, they can't really be too flat far apart, but you know what I'm saying. When the 20 and the 200's wide apart, that's your wide state. I don't care if that's at the open, in the middle of the day, at the end of the day. All right? And then, of course, you have the middle, which is more of a neutral state. So you can't say it's narrow, tight, and narrow, but you also can't say it's super wide either. That would be more of a neutral state. Now, neutral states are trending states up or down. Let me go to the chart so that you understand this concept, because guys, let me tell you this. If you can't identify correctly the stock state, you can't really get things right with any degree of consistency. This is one of the foundational principles of consistency. You've got to get the state right, because the state correctly tells you what kind of trade to make. And if you don't have the state right, you don't know what kind of trade to go to next. You don't know the next step, what kind of trade, and not knowing what kind of trade sets you up for irregular performance. All right, so let me go to some charts here. Let me show you here. So what you should be looking at right now is a 2-minute chart of NVIDIA. Now, what I'm going to do is go to the open today. All right, so I'm going to go to the open today. Now, watch this. Okay. Now, do you see the open? Wow, check this out, guys. Smoke on this. Look at this state. Now, remember how I told you how to judge the state, right? You judge the state by whether both your moving averages, the 20, the blue line, and the red line, the 200, are relatively close together and flat. So do you see that right there, right? So here, the 20 and the 200 are relatively flat together and close. Okay? Now, from this close position, guys, from this tight position, your best trades come from here to the upside or here to the downside, right? So from this state, NVIDIA opens right in the desired location right there. You see? Boom. And OMG. My goodness. Was that an amazing explosion from a narrow state? Now, that's at the open. The question was, well, how do I determine the state after the open? Well, this is after the open. Look at your state. 20 is up here. 200's way down here. Now you're in a wide state. Okay? So narrow state here. Look at how narrow the space is. Wide state here. Look at how wide the space is between the two moving averages. So we went from narrow to wide. And all markets do, guys, is go from narrow to wide, back to narrow again. Sometimes they go narrow to wide down and back to narrow again. Now, what throws people with this, guys, what throws people is that the back to narrow is not always in the same spot. So let me show you, let me give you an example of this, right? So you might go something like narrow, boom, to wide, and then narrow again is kind of up here, right? And you might do another one. You follow what I'm saying? So the narrow states don't have to line up. Doesn't have to be over here. Okay? It can also, you can also get something like narrow state, boom, to wide, and it catches up. And you get the narrow state here again. You can also get this to the downside, narrow state, back to narrow state here, and boom, narrow state to up, and then narrow state all the way back down here. So the narrow states can happen anywhere. My point is that you must be able to identify, especially the two dominant ones, guys. You got to be able to identify, okay, I'm in a wide state here, I'm in a narrow state here. I'm in a wide state here, I'm in a narrow state here. I'm in a narrow state here. I don't care where you are in the day, the open, the middle of the day, the end of the day, you can still judge the distance between your 20-period moving average and your 200-period moving average. Now, let me just always remind you of this, guys, all right? Let me remind you of this. Listen to me carefully. The numbers of people, guys, the numbers of people that actually know this, very small. Consider yourselves elite, guys. Consider yourselves elite in this regard, okay?